Montana Territory, 1872. Faith Zimmerman stared at the blood trail leading into the woods beyond her family's homestead. The crimson droplets stood stark against the fresh morning snow, a vivid trail that disappeared among the ponderosa pines. She clutched her father's old Springfield rifle closer to her chest, its familiar weight offering little comfort against the unknown. "Pa would tell me to mind my own," she whispered to herself, her breath forming clouds in the crisp December air. But her father wasn't here to advise her. He and her brothers had left 3 days ago for Helena to sell their autumn harvest and purchase supplies for the winter ahead. Faith adjusted her woolen shawl and took a steadying breath. At 22, she was old enough to make her own decisions, even foolish ones. Something or someone was wounded, and whatever waited in those woods might need help. With one last glance at the small cabin behind her, she followed the blood into the forest. The trail wasn't difficult to follow. Whatever was bleeding hadn't tried to hide its path. Faith moved carefully, her boots crunching softly on the snow-covered ground. The blood splatters grew larger as she ventured deeper, and her heart quickened with each step. She found him in a small clearing, slumped against the broad trunk of an ancient pine. At first glance, he was simply a dark shape against the white landscape. But as Faith drew closer, she realized she was looking at a man, a Native American man, dressed in buckskins adorned with intricate beadwork that marked him as someone of importance. His eyes were closed, his breathing shallow. A crude bandage fashioned from a piece of deerskin was tied around his thigh, soaked through with blood. Beside him lay a finely crafted bow and a quiver of arrows. Faith hesitated, her rifle half-raised. The tensions between settlers and the indigenous tribes had eased in recent years, but stories of violence on both sides still circulated. Her family's homestead had been peaceful, but her father always warned her to be cautious. The man's eyes suddenly opened, dark, intense eyes that fixed on her with startling clarity despite his weakened state. He made no move toward the weapons at his side. "I mean no harm," Faith said, lowering her rifle slightly. The man studied her face for a long moment before responding in English that was accented but clear. "I did not expect to find a white woman alone in these woods. I'm not usually in the habit of following blood trails," Faith replied, but it seemed wrong to ignore someone who might need help. A ghost of a smile touched the man's lips. "My people would say you have a strong spirit." He winced as he shifted position. "I am Painted Horse, war chief of the Northern Cheyenne." Faith's eyes widened. She had heard of Painted Horse, a respected leader known for seeking peaceful solutions while fiercely protecting his people's interests. The newspapers in Helena sometimes mentioned him in articles about tribal negotiations with the government. "I'm Faith Zimmerman," she said. "My family has a homestead nearby." She gestured toward his wound. "You're losing a lot of blood." Painted Horse nodded grimly. "Hunters. They mistook me for game, or pretended to." Faith knelt in the snow beside him, setting her rifle within reach. "May I?" she asked, gesturing toward his wound. After a moment's consideration, he nodded. She carefully untied the makeshift bandage. The bullet had torn through the outer part of his thigh, leaving an angry gash that still bled steadily. "The bullet went clean through," she observed. "That's fortunate, at least." "I have had worse," Painted Horse said, though the tightness around his eyes betrayed his pain. "You need proper tending," Faith decided. "Can you walk with help?" "My cabin isn't far." Surprise registered on his face. "You would bring an injured Cheyenne into your home?" "I would bring anyone who needed help," Faith replied simply. "My mother was a healer before she passed. She taught me that suffering doesn't distinguish between peoples." Painted Horse regarded her silently, then nodded. "Your mother was wise." With considerable effort and Faith's support, Painted Horse managed to stand. He towered over her, and despite his injury, she could sense the strength in him. He collected his weapons, slinging them over his shoulder before leaning heavily against her. Their progress was slow and painful. By the time they reached the cabin, both were breathing hard, and fresh blood had soaked through the bandage Faith had hastily reapplied. The cabin was modest but solidly built, with a stone fireplace that kept the interior comfortably warm. Faith helped Painted Horse to her father's bed, ignoring a momentary twinge of worry about what her family would think of a Cheyenne chief occupying it. "I need to clean the wound properly," she explained, gathering supplies. Clean cloths, a basin of water heated on the stove, and a bottle of whiskey her father kept for medicinal purposes. This will hurt. Pain is an old friend, Painted Horse replied stoically, but he couldn't suppress a sharp intake of breath when the whiskey touched his wound. Faith worked methodically, cleaning away the dried blood and dirt before applying a poultice of herbs her mother had taught her to prepare. She wrapped the leg with clean strips of cotton torn from an old sheet. "You have done this before," Painted Horse observed as she tied off the bandage. "Too many times," Faith admitted. "Frontier life isn't gentle." She helped him drink some water and prepared a broth from the previous night's stew. As Painted Horse ate, Faith found herself studying him. His features were strong and weathered by the elements, with high cheekbones and eyes that seemed to see more than most. His long black hair was braided with small ornaments she couldn't identify. He carried himself with dignity even while injured and at the mercy of a stranger. "Your family," he said suddenly. "They are not here. My father and brothers went to Helena for supplies. They should return in a few days." She paused. "My mother died 2 winters ago. Fever took her." "I am sorry," Painted Horse said, and Faith could hear genuine sympathy in his voice. The spirits gained a strong woman. "Thank you." Faith busied herself with tidying up, uncomfortable with the sudden emotion that tightened her throat. "You should rest now. The wound wasn't as deep as I feared, but you've lost blood and need to regain your strength." Painted Horse nodded and settled back on the bed. Within minutes, exhaustion claimed him, and his breathing deepened into sleep. Faith watched him for a moment, struck by the strange turn her day had taken. Then she quietly went about her chores, keeping one eye on her unexpected guest. Outside, snow began to fall more heavily, casting a hushed blanket over the Montana wilderness. The blizzard arrived without warning that night, howling winds driving snow against the cabin walls with relentless fury. Faith added wood to the fire and peered out the frosted window at a world turned white and formless. "Your father and brothers will not return soon," Painted Horse observed from the bed, his voice startling Faith. She turned to find him awake and watching her. "No," she agreed. "Not in this weather. They're sensible men. They'll wait it out in Helena." Painted Horse nodded. "The winter spirits are angry tonight." Faith smiled slightly. "That's one way to put it." She approached to check his bandage. "How is your leg feeling?" "Better. Your healing skills are strong." Their eyes met briefly before Faith looked away, uncomfortably aware of the impropriety of their situation. A young unmarried woman alone with a man, especially one from a culture so different from her own. Yet something about Painted Horse put her at ease in a way she couldn't explain. "I should change your bandage," she said, gathering fresh supplies. As she worked, Painted Horse spoke of his people, their traditions, beliefs, and the challenges they faced as white settlers pushed ever farther west. Faith found herself captivated by his stories, particularly his descriptions of the stars and how they guided his people. "My people believe the stars are the campfires of those who have gone before us," he explained. "They watch over us and light our way when darkness falls." "That's beautiful," Faith said softly. "My mother used to say that God placed the stars in the sky as reminders that we're never truly alone." "Perhaps your mother's God and my people's spirits are not so different," Painted Horse suggested. "They both offer guidance and hope." Faith considered this as she finished her work. "Maybe you're right. I've never thought of it that way." The blizzard continued for 3 days, keeping them confined to the cabin. During that time, Faith learned more about Painted Horse's life than she would have thought possible. He spoke of his childhood, his rise to leadership, and his efforts to find a peaceful path forward for his people in a rapidly changing world. In turn, Faith shared stories of her own life, her love of books, her dreams of someday seeing the ocean, and her struggle to keep the family farm thriving after her mother's death. By the 3rd evening, Painted Horse was strong enough to sit at the table for dinner. Faith had prepared a rabbit stew, and they ate by lamplight as the storm outside finally began to subside. "Your wound is healing well," Faith observed. "You should be able to travel soon, once the snow settles." Something like disappointment flickered across Painted Horse's face. "Yes, my people will be concerned. Do they know where you are?" He shook his head. "I was scouting alone when I was shot. Our winter camp is 2 days' ride from here." He studied her face in the warm glow of the lamp. "You have been kind when many would not have been." Faith shrugged, embarrassed by his gratitude. "Anyone would have helped." "No, Faith Zimmerman," he said firmly. "Not anyone. What you have done takes courage and an open heart. Both are rare gifts. His use of her full name sent an unexpected warmth through her. Over the past days, something had shifted between them, a tentative bridge built across the vast differences of their worlds. The following morning dawned clear and bright. The storm had passed, leaving behind a transformed landscape of pristine white drifts and ice-jeweled trees. Faith stood on the cabin porch, breathing in the crisp air and watching the sun rise over the distant mountains. Painted Horse joined her, moving carefully but steadily. "It is beautiful," he said, gazing out at the vista. "Yes," Faith agreed, though she found her attention drawn more to the man beside her than to the scenery. They stood in companionable silence until Painted Horse spoke again. "I must return to my people today." Faith nodded, ignoring the hollow feeling that suddenly opened inside her. "Of course, I can spare some provisions for your journey." "I would be grateful," he said, "and I wish to offer something in return." From around his neck, he removed a small leather pouch suspended on a braided cord. He opened it and extracted a beautifully crafted pendant, a small circular piece of polished stone with intricate carvings. "This belonged to my grandmother," he explained, holding it out to her. "It is said to protect the wearer from harm and bring clarity in times of confusion." Faith stared at the offered gift. "I couldn't possibly. It's a family heirloom." "You have earned it," Painted Horse insisted. "Please." After a moment's hesitation, Faith accepted the pendant. It was warm from resting against his skin, and the carvings caught the morning light in subtle patterns. "Thank you," she said softly. "I'll treasure it." Painted Horse nodded, something unspoken passing between them. Within the hour, he was prepared to leave. Faith had provided him with dried meat, bread, and a water skin for his journey. She had also insisted he take one of her father's old coats, practical rather than a gift, she told herself, though the truth was more complicated. They stood at the edge of the clearing, the moment of farewell awkward and weighted with things neither quite knew how to express. "Your father and brothers will return soon?" Painted Horse asked. "Tomorrow or the next day, I expect," Faith replied. He nodded, satisfied. "I do not like leaving you alone." "I've been managing," she reminded him with a small smile. "Yes, you are stronger than many warriors I know." He adjusted the bow slung across his back. "Faith Zimmerman, I will not forget what you have done." "Neither will I," she said quietly. "Be safe, Painted Horse." He held her gaze for a long moment, then turned and walked away, his tall figure soon disappearing among the pines. Faith stood watching the empty space where he had been, the pendant warm in her hand, wondering if she would ever see him again. Spring came late to the Montana Territory that year. By April, the snow had finally retreated to the highest peaks, and the land awakened with wildflowers and the fresh green of new growth. Faith worked alongside her father and brothers, preparing the fields for planting and tending to the animals that had survived the harsh winter. She had not seen Painted Horse since that January morning when he'd walked away into the forest. Her family had returned the day after his departure, full of stories from Helena and relief at finding her safe. Faith had told them about the injured traveler she'd helped, a hunter, she'd said vaguely, caught in the blizzard. She kept the pendant hidden beneath her clothing, a secret memory of those strange, intimate days. As the weeks passed, Faith found herself scanning the horizon more often than she should, hoping for a glimpse of a tall figure approaching from the west. But no such figure appeared, and gradually, she tried to accept that their paths had crossed only briefly, a momentary intersection of two different worlds that could not sustain connection. It was on a warm afternoon in late May when Faith, working alone in the Vegetata garden, heard the sound of horses approaching. She straightened, pushing a strand of hair from her face as she turned toward the road. 5 riders appeared over the rise, Native Americans, their horses moving at an unhurried pace. Faith's heart leaped when she recognized the lead rider. Painted Horse sat tall and proud on a paint stallion, fully recovered from his wound. He wore ceremonial dress, buckskins adorned with elaborate beadwork and feathers, signifying his status among his people. Faith wiped her hands on her apron, suddenly conscious of her work-worn appearance and dirt-smudged face. She walked toward the approaching riders, her legs feeling strangely unsteady. The small party stopped at the edge of the property. Faith's father emerged from the barn, his expression wary as he moved to stand beside his daughter. "Faith," he said quietly. Do you know these people? Before she could answer, Painted Horse dismounted and approached, stopping at a respectful distance. His eyes, however, were fixed solely on Faith. Faith Zimmerman, he said formally. I have come to speak with your father. Faith's heart hammered in her chest. This is Painted Horse, she told her father, chief of the Northern Cheyenne. Recognition dawned on Patrick Zimmerman's face. The hunter you helped this winter, he said slowly, understanding more than Faith had revealed. Painted Horse inclined his head. Your daughter saved my life when others would have left me to die. She showed courage and compassion that I have not forgotten. Patrick studied the Cheyenne chief carefully, then extended his hand. Any man who speaks so well of my daughter is welcome here. The two men shook hands, and Faith felt something tight within her chest begin to loosen. I would speak with you privately, Mr. Zimmerman, Painted Horse said. There is a matter of importance I wish to discuss. Faith watched, puzzled and increasingly anxious, as her father and Painted Horse walked toward the house, deep in conversation. The other Cheyenne riders remained mounted, their expressions impassive. Faith's younger brother, Daniel, appeared at her side. What's happening? He asked. I don't know, Faith admitted, though her heart was racing with possibilities she hardly dared consider. It was nearly an hour before the two men emerged from the house. Patrick's face was thoughtful, betraying nothing as they walked back toward where Faith waited. Faith, her father said, Chief Painted Horse has something to ask you. Painted Horse stepped forward, his dark eyes intense as they met hers. Among my people, he began, when a man finds a woman of extraordinary spirit, one whose courage matches his own, whose wisdom complements his strength, it is customary to seek permission to court her. He paused. I have asked your father's blessing to court you, Faith Zimmerman. Faith stared at him, speechless. Of all the scenarios she had imagined during their months apart, this had seemed too impossible to even consider. Why? She finally managed to ask. A rare smile touched Painted Horse's lips. Because in those days we shared, I saw more clearly than ever before. Our worlds are different, but our hearts speak the same language. It won't be easy, Faith said quietly, acutely aware of her father and brother listening, of the Cheyenne warriors watching from a distance. The worthiest paths rarely are, Painted Horse replied. But I believe what could grow between us would be worth the difficulty. Faith touched the pendant that still hung beneath her dress. My father, I've told him I'll not stand in the way of what might be a match the good Lord himself arranged, Patrick said, his voice gruff with emotion. Though I'll admit it's not what I expected for you, Faith. Faith looked from her father to Painted Horse, overwhelmed by the moment's significance. I would welcome your courtship, she said finally, her voice steady despite the trembling in her hands. The courtship of Faith Zimmerman and Painted Horse became the talk of the territory. For nearly a year, the Cheyenne chief made regular visits to the Zimmerman homestead, sometimes staying for days as he helped with farm work and learned the ways of settler life. In turn, Faith visited the Cheyenne winter and summer camps, learning their language, customs, and traditions under the guidance of the tribal elders. Their relationship faced opposition from both communities. Some settlers viewed Faith as a traitor to her kind, while certain members of Painted Horse's tribe questioned his judgment in pursuing a white woman. But as months passed, the genuine respect and affection between them became evident to all who saw them together. Faith's brothers, initially suspicious, grew to admire Painted Horse's knowledge of the land and his skill as a hunter. Patrick Zimmerman, watching his daughter's happiness bloom, found himself increasingly supportive of the unusual match. Among the Cheyenne, an elderly medicine woman named Gray Dove took a particular interest in Faith, teaching her tribal medicines and telling her stories of the people's history. You have a Cheyenne spirit in a white woman's body, Gray Dove told her once. Perhaps the Creator knew Painted Horse would need a bridge between worlds. By the spring of 1873, Faith and Painted Horse had mapped out a future together, one that honored both their heritages while forging something new. They would build a home on the border between settler lands and tribal territory, symbolizing their commitment to bridging the divide between their peoples. Their wedding day dawned clear and warm in early June. It was a celebration unlike any the Montana Territory had seen before, a ceremony that combined Christian vows with Cheyenne rituals, attended by members of both communities. Faith wore a white dress her mother had preserved for her wedding day, adorned with Cheyenne beadwork carefully sewn by gray dove. Around her neck hung the pendant Painted Horse had given her that winter morning so long ago. Painted Horse wore traditional ceremonial attire, but had consented to the exchange of rings, understanding its significance in Faith's culture. A traveling minister who had known Faith's family for years performed the Christian service, while a Cheyenne elder conducted the tribal blessing. The two stood beneath an arbor made of pine branches and decorated with wildflowers, joining hands as they committed their lives to one another. "I take you, Faith Zimmerman, to be my wife," Painted Horse said in clear, steady English. "I pledge to honor your ways as you have honored mine, to protect you with my strength, and to walk beside you through all seasons of our life together." Faith, tears shining in her eyes, responded, "I take you, Painted Horse, to be my husband. I promise to respect your traditions as you have respected mine, to support you with my whole heart, and to build with you a home where both our worlds can meet in peace." They exchanged simple gold bands that Patrick had purchased in Helena, and then participated in the Cheyenne blanket ceremony, where they were symbolically wrapped together in a beautifully crafted blanket to signify their union. As the celebration continued into the evening, with music, dancing, and feasting that drew from both cultures, Faith and Painted Horse found a quiet moment alone. "Are you happy, my wife?" Painted Horse asked, the term still new and wondrous on his lips. Faith looked up at him, her heart so full it seemed impossible to contain. "Happier than I ever imagined possible," she answered truthfully. "And you, my husband?" "I am complete," he said simply. "The day you found me bleeding in the snow, I thought the spirits had abandoned me. Now I see they were guiding me to where I was meant to be." Faith touched the pendant at her throat. "To think that all this began with a blood trail in the snow." "It began long before that," Painted Horse countered. "Our paths were drawn together by forces greater than ourselves. The blood trail was merely the moment our eyes opened to see what was always meant to be." They stood together as twilight deepened over the Montana wilderness, their joined lives stretching before them like an uncharted territory, challenging but full of promise. By 1880, the homestead that Faith and Painted Horse built had become more than just their home. Situated on land that bordered both settler territories and Cheyenne hunting grounds, it served as a meeting place where understanding could grow between cultures that had long viewed each other with suspicion and hostility. Their house was a unique blend of traditional log cabin construction and Cheyenne design elements, with a large central room where people from both communities could gather. Outside, they maintained both a settler-style vegetata garden and a medicinal plant garden based on Cheyenne healing traditions. Faith had become fluent in the Cheyenne language and was respected as a healer who combined her mother's knowledge with what she had learned from Gray Dove. Painted Horse continued his leadership role among his people while also serving as an official liaison with territorial authorities, advocating for fair treatment of indigenous peoples. Their greatest joy, however, was their family. 2 sons and a daughter filled their home with laughter and hope. The children grew up fluent in both English and Cheyenne, equally comfortable riding across the open plains or sitting in the small schoolhouse Faith had helped establish for children of both communities. On a crisp autumn evening in 1890, Faith and Painted Horse sat together on the porch of their home, watching the sunset paint the distant mountains in shades of gold and purple. Their oldest son, River, was now 16 and showing signs of the leadership qualities that defined his father. Their daughter, Emily, at 14, had Faith's healing touch and quiet strength. Their youngest, Joseph, just 10, was a free spirit who moved effortlessly between worlds. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if I hadn't followed that blood trail?" Faith asked, her head resting on her husband's shoulder. Painted Horse considered the question. "The Great Spirit would have found another way to bring us together," he said with certainty. "Our lives were meant to be woven as one." Faith smiled. "Such confidence." "Not confidence," he corrected. "Faith." He took her hand, his thumb brushing over the gold band she still wore alongside a beaded Cheyenne bracelet. "Just as your name suggests." They sat in comfortable silence as the first stars appeared in the darkening sky. "Our worlds are changing," Painted Horse observed, his voice carrying a note of sadness. "The old ways fade more with each passing year." Faith nodded. The frontier was disappearing, giving way to towns and railroads. The freedom that both settlers and indigenous peoples had sought in the vast territories was increasingly constrained by progress and politics. But what we've built here remains, she said softly. Not just this home, but the understanding between peoples. Our children carry both traditions within them. Nothing can take that away. Painted Horse turned to look at his wife. 18 years had passed since he had first seen her standing in the snow with her father's rifle. Yet the core of who she was remained unchanged. The courage, compassion, and clarity of purpose that had drawn him to her from the beginning. You were my healing, he said simply. Not just of the body, but of the spirit. Faith reached up to touch his face, tracing the lines that time and experience had etched there. And you were mine. You showed me that the world is bigger and more wondrous than I had imagined. From inside the house came the sound of their children's voices, a harmony of the future they had created together. Come, Faith said, rising and extending her hand. Our family is waiting. Painted Horse took her hand and stood. Together, they walked into the warmth of their home, leaving the frontier twilight behind them. A chief and a settler girl who had found in each other not just love, but a bridge between worlds that would endure long after the last traces of blood had vanished from the snow.